Members, it's now time for questions to the Minister for Finance, but first of all, a number of questions have been withdrawn. Question 5 by Mr Jerry Kelly, and topical question 3 by Jerry Kelly, and topical 10 by Dolores Kelly. And I now call Paula Bradley to ask the first question. Ms Bradley.
Thank you. Question 1.
I guess Éireann Saranira Arigadish on Fragra Horchai could now call the Minister for Finance.
I'm pleased to say that a further 12-month non-domestic rates holiday has been fully implemented and is now providing a further £230 million worth of support for businesses dealing with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. This package of support goes well beyond what has been given in England and demonstrates the Executive's commitment to providing certainty and support for businesses. It means the additional rates support provided to business over 2 years amounts to more than £500 million. The legislation for this additional holiday came into operation on the 7th of May. The regulations provide details of the businesses who are eligible for this support, helping to ensure that some 29,000 businesses continue to have a rates-free period.
Call Paula Bradley for a supplementary.
Thank you, and thank the Minister for his answer. Minister, can I just ask then, have we any indication how this will affect the overall budget going forward, especially that for local councils?
Well, the local councils' intake and rates is protected, as it was during the last financial year as well. So in many ways, it's actually a benefit for them that rates income, if a business happened to fail through the course of the year, that rates income has been protected for them. It did cost us, as I say, over £500 million. That was from COVID money that came to us as Barnett consequentials from Lutton, so it wasn't out of the original baseline budget, it was additional COVID money. But nonetheless, it's very important for those businesses, and quite a lot of them had identified that as one of the primary requests that they had in order to secure some certainty for them going forward that bill was taken off the table for them.
Éireann Mayor Melissa McHugh for Newcastle. I call Melissa McHugh.
Gormagat last Concorda, agus buhis leis Ira Fosta, founded the Ratchets. Minister, just given the Executive's reliance on rates, do you agree that the Fiscal Commission provides an opportunity to consider other sources of funding in an effort to raise revenue here within the 6 counties?
Well, the Fiscal Commission has just begun its work. I was pleased to meet it last week, just to get an update from what was happening with it. And of course, it will be looking at the totality of fiscal powers that may become available to an Executive. And of course, that would involve, if such a proposal was put forward and agreed by the Executive, it would involve then a negotiation with Treasury. But rates bring us in about 10% of our budget, and clearly they're a very important source of revenue for the Executive and are used to support our public services. But I think, yes, it is very timely that we do have the Fiscal Commission looking at the broad range of powers that may become available to us, and that there is an informed debate within the Assembly and in the public generally in relation to those.
Called Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, will you work with the Minister for Communities to lobby the Treasury to allow councils to utilise capitalisation schemes given the additional financial strain caused by the pandemic? And can you reassure the House that businesses won't face a cliff edge at the end of reliefs in April 2022?
Well, firstly, we regularly engage with Treasury on behalf of a range of departments, so if the Department of Communities have such a request, we're more than happy to work with them on that and to engage with Treasury. We've had the initial year-long rates holiday, and then we were able to extend that. At the start, we thought it may be just for 6 months. We were then, because of additional COVID money, able to extend that for another. So that's two full years rates holiday, which is a very significant contribution to a lot of businesses at the cost of in around £500 million. We don't have any projection for any further additional COVID money going forward. So I have to say that I think beyond that period it's very unlikely that we will have money, that type of money to give for support for business. Of course, we have fully funded the rates recovery, or the economic recovery package that the Department for the Economy are bringing forward, and that hopefully will stimulate businesses so that they can get back to a level of trading, which means they're in a better position to meet any other bills that are coming in.
Mayor Pat Catney for Newcastle. I call Pat Catney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, we do welcome whatever help has went out to small businesses. But looking at the re-examination of non-domestic and regional rates, it must feed into that broader examination of Northern Ireland's fiscal powers and how they match the long-term economic challenges. It's to give businesses any chance in recovering from this pandemic, Minister.
Well, the look at non-domestic rates is ongoing, and we are beginning a revaluation exercise at a much shorter time frame than ever has been done here before. And that again was a request from businesses that they didn't want that sudden jump in rates, that sudden redistribution as the revaluation exercise do between various sectors. So it will take account of the pandemic. Of course, we continue to engage with businesses, and I did over the last number of weeks engage with some of them in relation to ongoing review and reform of the rates generally. With the rates holiday, it was almost unnoticed that there was an 18% reduction in non-domestic rates, which was very much welcomed by other businesses who couldn't avail of the rates holiday. But we'll continue to engage with business, we'll do the revaluation exercise, and we look to how we can improve the rates picture, because we know it's a vital part of income for us in terms of public services, but it is a significant bill for a lot of businesses.
Mayor Karen Mullen, for your cast, I call Karen Mullen.
Thank you. Question number 2, Minister.
I'm planning to keep non-domestic rates under close scrutiny as we emerge from the pandemic. My department's 2019 review of business rates was undertaken in completely different circumstances to that now faced by our economy. The review did provide some important insights, and I'm pleased that significant progress has been made in respect of many of the issues highlighted during the public consultation. The overall high level of business rates and the balance of business rates to domestic rates were raised as issues during the public consultation. In response, I have reduced the regional business rate by 18% for 2020-21. In addition to this, I have held the rate at the reduced amount for 21-22. I extended the small business rate relief scheme and restored the rural ATM relief scheme in response to feedback received. I have also made 2 changes that have been sought to assist district councils in relation to district rates. And finally, I recently announced the revaluation of non-domestic rate property, which was another issue highlighted during the consultation. As you are aware, rates are one of the few revenue-raising powers available to the Executive to generate funding for vital public services. I have established a fiscal commission to examine the case for increasing fiscal powers available to us.
Karen Mullen, supplementary question for Karen Mullen.
I thank the Minister for his answers so far, and I also welcome the Minister's commitment to ensuring that the rates bill for businesses has taken into account the impact of the pandemic over the last 18 months. Can the Minister also provide an update on Reveal 2023?
Well, I recently announced that revaluation for non-domestic properties, and that was delivered on a commitment that there was to more frequent revaluations. The pandemic has had a dramatic impact on the economy, resulting in changes between business sectors, and this will feed through to changes in the rental values of many properties. The last revaluation exercise was just over a year ago, but I've asked Land and Property Service to bring forward another revaluation in the shortest possible time. Reval 2023 will maintain fairness and ensure businesses are paying rates which take account of the impact of the pandemic, and values will be based on rental evidence on the 1st of October 2021.
Call Peter Weir for a question.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Minister? The Minister obviously outlined the levels of reliefs that have been there during the COVID, which I think are very welcome. Can I ask the Minister what thinking has been given to transitional arrangements so that whenever that 18%, as he mentioned, that has been reduced suddenly doesn't escalate in one jump to a position in which they're resuming to a much higher level of rates having to be paid?
Well, I think that the reduction was in response to a very long-term lobbying before I came into the position of Finance Minister, that there was a recognition in the department that our business rates are much higher, comparable to basically anywhere else, are much higher. And so the 18% reduction was an attempt to address that. I don't see any argument or logic, albeit the Executive needs all the finances available to it, he would understand, but I don't see any logic in trying to put that back up again, particularly in response to undoubtedly an economic downturn that's going to follow on the back of the pandemic. And so I think the objective of the Executive, as he will know from his time there, was to try and keep businesses afloat, trying to keep our high street and our local businesses as best as we could. So I wouldn't see the Executive agreeing an exercise which would put a lot of businesses in significant danger of going out of business altogether. So I don't foresee the circumstances where that sudden increase that he talks about will come about. Of course, the revaluation exercise is a redistribution of the rates burden between businesses, and the importance of doing it on a frequent basis is to make sure there isn't that sudden jolt from a value maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago up to a new value. That can create sometimes a higher level of change. And so I think we will continue with the objective to try and support businesses in the time ahead, including through the rates.
Call Andrew Muir.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his responses thus far. And I do acknowledge the different issues that have been taken over the last period of time, such as the actual percentage decrease, the commitment to reval 2023, and also the reliefs that have been put in place. But the last review was done in relation to this was by LPS. It was done in-house in 2019. Will the Minister not accept, in order for the business community to have confidence in terms of the rating system, there needs to be an independent review of a rating system, like occurred in Scotland under the Barclay Review?
Well, I have to say that I've met with business organisations more frequently probably than ever over the course of the pandemic, addressing a range of issues, obviously in relation to business supports and all that, but also discussing the rates issue. And I've never had that sense that people don't trust the department to do a rates review. What they want is maximum consultation, and that's already beginning again. I did a meeting with business organisations just about 2 weeks ago in the department to discuss this idea of review. Again, I think people are content for the department to do that. They want to make sure that it's open, it's transparent, there's a significant level of consultation. And obviously there are different interests here between what the department needs to do and what businesses would like to see, and that's understandable. What we have to try and do is find a system which is fair, which recognises the burden that businesses are under, but also recognises that the executive does require this resource to support public services as well. So I don't have plans, to be honest, to do an independent review. What I do intend to do is continue that dialogue with businesses and business organisations to make sure that whatever the department is doing is transparent and accessible to them in order that they can make their points of view known.
I call Rachel Woods.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister's outlined the rate review and sort of policy issues that had been looked at, but can I ask, has the process for calculating business rates changed either by policy or by legislation in the last number of financial years?
Not that I'm aware, certainly not in my time. Now, I presume that if changed in legislation terms, that wouldn't have happened in the previous 3 years because there was no legislation going through here, unless there was a policy change, and I'm happy to have a look at that and come back to the member, but certainly not in my time. What we have tried to do, obviously we've been focused on responding to the business needs during the pandemic, but in terms of that rates policy is to respond to some of the issues that were raised in the consultation in 2018, I think it was, or 2017, respond to some of that, it was 2019, just before I came into office, respond to that consultation, implement some of the issues that were raised with us, and continue to engage with business in the time ahead as we review the policies.
I call Doug Beattie for a question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question 3, Minister.
I met the Fiscal Commission Chair and members again last week, where they provided me with an update on their important work to date. The Commission act independently of ministerial and departmental direction, and our agenda covered practical operational issues. They indicated that as part of their work programme they have now begun meeting a wide range of stakeholders, which I understand included a discussion with yourself on the 21st of June as part of their engagement with political parties. I am pleased with the progress they set out at our last meeting and that they are on target to deliver their final report to me before the end of the current mandate, setting out their recommendations for future tax varying and revenue raising powers here. The incoming executive can then use it as a basis for setting a future position on fiscal devolution issues.
Supplementary for Mr Beattie.
Thank you, Minister. And you're right, I did meet them and I thought it was a fascinating meeting, I've got to say. And one of the criteria that they raised about this extra tax revenue raising powers was the stability of this institutions here. Could I just ask the Minister for his assessment on how stable we are? I'm not asking about whether we will tipple or not, but is our instability actually pretty much going to stop us being able to use extra tax raising powers?
Well, if there is a recommendation to an incoming executive that we do that, that then begins a discussion with Treasury and a negotiation with them. And I presume that one of the issues would come up would be the stability of the institutions. He knows as well as I do in politics, nothing's ever certain. And while you can assume that you know, things are going along on an even keel, events often come in to upend those. And we've had a fairly unstable, aside from the pandemic, which was in some ways destabilising in terms of our public service, but also I think it was a solidifying exercise for the executive to have to pull together to face that emergency, and the parties that are in the executive have to pull together to face that emergency. But nonetheless, there has been a significant instability as well, particularly within one of the executive parties, and that has had an impact. So this will be a long enough process, because it will be a report that will come back to us. It will have to be considered. I'm hoping it will generate a debate not only in this institution but a wider public debate. An incoming executive will have to take a view, and then that begins a period of dialogue with Treasury. So I think there will be ample chance to prove the stability of this institution over the course of that.
Ceist ag Philip Wiggin.
Last can call you. The Minister will be aware that the way businesses, companies and consumers carry out transactions is changing, and obviously will continue to change. So I thank the Minister for his update on the work of the Fiscal Commission. Can I ask him further to that update if, as part of its wider remit, the Fiscal Commission will consider an online sales tax to help level the playing field between bricks and mortar type businesses and online sales?
Well, this is an issue that has been raised many times, I think, because there is a sense of unfairness, particularly over the course of the pandemic, when businesses, our high street business, had to close their doors, and online became all the more important, and they don't have the kind of same rates burden that perhaps a lot of smaller, more local businesses have. I understand that the Treasury are looking at the idea of taxation issues currently, or the remit of the Treasury. I understand they're looking at this area in relation to online businesses, so it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that. I'm sure the Fiscal Commission will take evidence from people in relation to where they would like to see powers devolved to us. But as I said, the Treasury are currently looking at that, and we would like to get a handle on what their take on it is, how this can be done. But there is certainly a growing sense among representations I get, not just from businesses but from other MLAs as well, that there is an unfairness in that arrangement between the high street, the local businesses and the online presence, which doesn't have any rates burden or very little rates burden attached to it.
Ceist Matthew Toole. Question for Matthew.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, as you know, I've been strongly supportive of, and my party has, of the setting up of the Fiscal Commission. Can you be clear, though? You mentioned that you're expecting the Fiscal Commission to report to you and your department by the end of the mandate. Is that report going to be laid in the Assembly? You've just said that you think it should generate debate in the Assembly, but surely in order to generate that debate, we have to be able to read it. Can you confirm that it won't just go to your department? And I'm not accusing your department of malfeasance. I'm just saying it would be good for it to be laid here in the Assembly so that we can all read it when it's ready to go.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But from my conversation with them the other day, I mean, they are an independent body. We will give them whatever support they need, but we're not directing them in any fashion. But they are have been asked to report to me. My understanding is they intend to produce an interim report sometime in the autumn, which I think would also be a good stimulant to public debate and perhaps further consultation and further input from, generally speaking, the public and political parties and business institutions and others, trade unions, into the final report. And it's my intention, certainly, that the purpose of this was to stimulate a debate, was to hopefully influence an executive to engage with this, as Scotland and Wales have done for many, many years now, to engage with this discussion in an informed way, so that an incoming executive and assembly could take decisions based on solid information. So, of course, that means that it has to be public. The reports have to be public, and I'm happy to make them, should it be to lay them in the chamber, tabling them for debate, whatever that requires. I'm very happy to make sure that an interim report and a final report are made public.
John O'Dowd. Question for John O'Dowd.
To date, the 10k top-up payments have been issued to 1,173 businesses that received the 25,000 retail, hospitality, tourism and leisure grant last year. The total value of those payments to date is £11.5 million. The 5k top-up payments have been issued to 12,114 businesses that received the 10,000 small business support grant last year. The total value of those payments to date is £60.4 million. Businesses that did not receive an automatic top-up payment, and any businesses which started to trade between the 20th of May 2020 and the 1st of March 2021 have been able to apply for the top-up grant since the 30th of June 2021. I expect the payments resulting from these applications to start issuing to businesses before the end of this month.
John O'Dowd. Supplementary question for John O'Dowd.
Thank the Minister for his answer thus far, and I welcome the interventions that he and his department has made, particularly the latest top-up payments to many businesses who were relying on it. Has the Minister any thoughts on those businesses who have multiple premises as to whether there's going to be support offered to those?
Yes, we have long recognised that a number of sectors, and the multiples being one of them, weren't able to avail of much, if any, support over the course of the pandemic, and so we've always been striving to try and find a way, or encouraging other departments to find a way to provide support to those businesses. We have engaged with people representing multiples over the last while, and we are committed to looking at a scheme which we hope will provide them some support in the autumn, and we'll work that through with them.
Justin McNulty. Supplement or question for Justin McNulty.
Minister, thank you for your answers thus far. Some 13,000 businesses did not qualify for support during the most recent lockdown. They were not forced to close, but nonetheless, they were seriously impacted due to the stay-at-home message. Can the Minister confirm that all of these businesses, many of which are family-owned businesses in the community, have received grants from his department?
Well, what we have endeavoured to do is to not only provide support, and we had to do that by regulation, so the regulations are brought forward by the Health Department. They tell us which businesses are obliged to close and which businesses can remain open, and we can't by law pay businesses which remain open under the LRSS scheme. We are forbidden to do so. So we have tried to find other ways to support some of those, and included in this question the 10k top-up and the 5k top-up were businesses that could remain open which have been able to avail of this support. Now, I can't guarantee that covers absolutely every business, because some businesses have been excluded on the basis that they were operating quite well during the lockdown. There were some businesses that experienced an upturn in trade. So, as far as we can, we have been not only doing the LRSS scheme to so many businesses, but we have been using the money that was left over at the end of the financial year ourselves to generate a scheme such as this, which will support further businesses. And just in relation to this top-up scheme alone, at the moment it's delivered over £70 million across businesses, with more to go out as businesses apply for it.
Andrew Muir for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to express my thanks to all the staff within his department for the work that they've done in distributing the grant assistance over well over a year, really, to be honest, in very challenging circumstances. The public health restrictions are still in place, and they're affecting businesses in many different ways. Given the example, within a public house, there's not, you don't go to the bar, it's all table service, and I've had businesses contact me who operate slot machines, so their businesses collapse because people aren't walking around the bar. Is there any consideration being given to assisting businesses which are still affected by the public health restrictions? Because for some of them, it's proven very difficult to continue now.
Well, can I say firstly, there was always a recognition that whatever support we could distribute through all of the grant schemes that we did, the Department of Economy did, the Department of Communities did, was never going to replace lost trade. It was just really to try and, because we wouldn't have the resource to do that, it was to try and give businesses a fighting chance of staying in business until such times as we hopefully could get back to normal trading on the other side of this pandemic. But I have to say the regulations in relation to what we can do in this regard are set by health. They did determine which businesses could close and which businesses would remain open, and we weren't by law allowed to assist businesses that weren't required to close in relation to that. So, but we always do recognise that even where businesses were allowed to open up, and that's why the rates holiday was applied to certain sectors of businesses, the ones that we recognise would continue to struggle, even if they, particularly in the hospitality and tourism sector, even if their businesses were allowed to open, certainly the restrictions that they had to operate in would mean that they would do less business. So the rates holiday was one way to try and offset some of that, but there's always a recognition that it never would replace the lost trade that they would have, but it really just try and give people a fighting chance to stay open until such times as they get back to full trade.
The next question is remotely, so could we please bring Declan McAleer onto the screens, please? Am I who, Declan?
Good last can call you.
Right, Lannery, okay, thanks, Minister.
In line with the NDNA commitment, the Executive Subcommittee on Reform was established to consider the recommendations of the RHI report in full and to oversee their implementation. The subcommittee met in July, November and December in 2020. Members of the Executive Subcommittee agreed a draft report setting out the response to the inquiry and the actions that are required to fulfil the remaining recommendations from the inquiry report. This report was forwarded to the Executive for agreement on the 26th of March this year. The Subcommittee also agreed a number of changes to the guidance for Ministers, the Special Advisor Code of Conduct, in light of the recommendations of the inquiry. They have also been provided to the Executive Office for consideration.
Declan McAleer. Supplementary question for Declan McAleer.
Gurmagat, I thank the Minister for his response. Does the Minister agree with me that if the public are to have confidence in these institutions, there should be no delay in the implementation of the recommendations from the RHI report? Gurmagat.
Well, I do agree with the member, and it's a source of some frustration to me that a number of months on from this was submitted to the Executive, we're still waiting on it to be dealt with. The subcommittee was made up of representation from all parties in the Executive, and the report was agreed by all of the members of the subcommittee. So I'm struggling to understand what the delay in terms of getting this to the Executive proper, getting it agreed and getting it implemented is. But nonetheless, I agree with him that the longer this runs on, the more I think it damages in terms of confidence that the Executive is going to take the issues that were raised in the report and to respond to them in a proper and timely fashion.
I call Jim Allister.
Given the excessive delay by the Executive, maybe it's a good thing that we got through some reforms under the Functioning of Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. But could I ask the Minister, as well as reform, the other burning issue with many people when they viewed the wreckage of RHI and the mishandling of things was the question, well, is there any discipline? And could the Minister update the House? Has anyone within the civil service been disciplined for their actions or inactions during RHI, and did bringing forward retirement cause many to escape discipline?
Well, there was, as he knows from his membership of the Finance Committee, there were a number of civil servants who were reported for further investigation and potentially disciplinary issues resulting from that. Some people did retire in the interim, which I think is unfortunate in terms of a proper and publicly understood outcome to the inquiry's recommendations. There are still ongoing matters because there are some legal matters being challenged in relation to that. So they have not yet concluded, and of course we have undertaken to provide the committee with as much information as we can provide them, subject to legal advice in relation to ongoing legal matters in the time ahead.
I called Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister provide his initial assessment of the impact of the Functioning of Government Miscellaneous Provisions Bill on the workings of the Executive and Special Advisors?
Well, I spoke against the bill. I made my views very clear in relation to it. I thought some of the propositions within it were impractical, and some of them actually probably contradicted delivery of good government. But nonetheless, the bill was passed in the final format once amendments were sorted through by the Assembly here, and the Department immediately, as it was obliged to do, has provided a report to all departments on what they need to do to make sure and observe the legislation that was passed. And that has caused some changes in terms of reporting and other matters in recording. A lot of issues which were already addressed in the RHI and report itself and would have been coming through in terms of the Executive Subcommittee and the Executive response anyway. But we have ensured that the matters which flowed from the bill have been distilled down, distributed to all departments to make sure that people fully understand the requirements that are now in law.
Agus tá mugan you phone you cast gasta. We have time for a quick question. Eirmir Cahill Boylan, the Hall.
Last week, cast over shot. Let out question number 7, please.
New decade, new approach commitments envisage that the number of arm's-length bodies will be rationalised and there will be efficiency savings, a strengthening of democratic control and improved accountability. The Executive subsequently agreed to a review of the ALBs to meet this commitment in June 2020. Following this initial analysis, the Executive has now been asked to agree to the way forward in respect of the review of the arm's-length bodies. Subject to the Executive's decision, it would be for individual departments to consider their respective ALBs and the way forward on an organisation-by-organisation basis. In line with the priority in NDNA, the Department of Finance will maintain and publish a record of ALB reviews undertaken and the outcome. The Department of Finance is preparing legislation that would enable departments to make any changes that would be required as a result of the reviews.
And that ends the period for listed questions. We'll now move to 15 minutes of topical questions, and I call Doug Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, the central access point for abortion services is run by the charity Informing Choices NI, and they're about to run out of their funding. Would the Minister consider assisting them with funding?
Well, normally the request for funding will come from a department which has a responsibility for that organisation or has a relationship of some shape with that organisation. So I'm very happy to consider any request that might come forward from a department for assistance in that regard. And I'm sure that there are vital services that are being provided to women. But it would really require, rather than the Department of Finance going out to look for that, it would require a sponsoring department to come forward who would, within the ambit of that department, this organisation would operate. I assume perhaps the Department of Health or perhaps maybe the Department of Justice in that regard, but certainly if such a request comes in, I'm more than happy to consider that with the relevant department and to talk to the Executive.
Supplementary question, Mr. Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister because he identifies. I mean, this is a really important service for women, and the monies that we're talking about is relatively small, £150,000, I think, for the year. And given the pressures that the health service is under in regards to waiting lists, in regards to the mental health strategy, and they already ask in regards to that. And I guess I've raised it, so I don't really have a follow-on question, but I absolutely take on board what the Minister has said. As I said, I'm happy to look at that. I also remind him that it's not just departments that can be sources of this. You know, for instance, particularly voluntary and community sector groups, the Dormant Accounts Fund, which has been delivered to the National Lottery, does look at resilience in organisations to make sure that they don't get to the point where they're almost going out of existence because of a lack of support, that they can build up resilience. And a number of other organisations will support the charities and other groups like that. So by all means, I'm happy to look at that, but they should also be looking at other sources of funding too.
The member's not in his place for question number 2, and question 3 has been withdrawn, so I therefore call Paula Bradley.
Mr Deputy Speaker. Minister, you'd be aware that social clauses have been in place within the Department for Communities for some years, especially when it comes to building homes within the social sector. So it's just, how do you see that working alongside the social value model that you brought along to the Chamber this morning?
Well, I see it certainly enhancing because a number of departments, in my own time back in DRD, we had social clauses in terms of some road service contracts to try and achieve some good social outcomes to them. But the problem with things such as this, it was kind of intermittent. There wasn't uniform, there wasn't a standard process for assessing social value and scoring social value. And that's why I think the paper that I brought to the Executive and I reported on this morning to the Assembly will bring that standardised process across all departments. A minimum scoring, a minimum threshold, and I think that will enhance the good work that some departments have been doing anyway off their own bat in relation to this, and ensure that those who are awarding the contracts, but also those who are bidding for them, have a clear understanding of what's required, that everybody's operating on the same playing field, and I think it will lead to much better outcomes and much better social outcomes as well.
Paula Bradley for a supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister for his answer. And the Minister, as he knows, many of those social clauses, especially within the construction sector, they were unable to actually utilise them to their full extent because they weren't written awfully well and have been around a long time. So it's just then to just further on from that, any conversations he's had with the Minister for the Economy around the apprenticeships, and I know in your statement today you had said about bringing jobs to deprived areas, and very much that whole social model, I can see how that could work within those areas.
I mean, the discussion in relation to this matter went to the Executive, and part of the changes we brought to the procurement is to make sure that rather than just being a Department of Finance policy, which we try to get other departments to adopt, that this is brought to the Executive and gets that sort of stamp of approval from the entire Executive, and then hopefully gets a uniform approach throughout all of those departments, because Executive Ministers are then obliged to follow through in relation to that. So I have a dialogue with a range of ministers in relation to all of this, but we certainly do want to see an improvement across the board in that. We want to see procurement used in that fashion. But where departments can achieve better social outcomes with some of the work they're doing, then by all means, what we're setting is a minimum standard. It doesn't mean that it stops there. Departments can do other things and can bring other improvements. We procure about £3 billion worth of goods and services each year. That has an enormous power to achieve an awful lot of other social good. And I'm hoping that the consequence of that policy we've brought through now will allow the Executive to do that right across the board.
Could we bring Sinead McLaughlin to the screens, please? Sinead, while at
Thank you, Speaker. Minister, I'm very concerned about the state of our town and city centres. They have been in decline for many, many years now, and I suppose the pandemic has exacerbated that decline. Have you been given consideration to how to radically review the fiscal policy that we have in relation to taxation of businesses? If so, can you give me some step-by-step points that you have taken in order to make sure that that review takes place very quickly?
Well, the only fiscal policy that we have currently that can be of that type of assistance to town centres is the rates policy. And of course, what we have done is, in response to the pandemic, is given a 2-year rates holiday to a substantial number of businesses at the cost of £500 million to the Executive. We also had reduced the non-domestic rate by 18% last year. We've kept it at that 18% reduction. And we've also, I suppose, in terms of trying to support business, we've given out, as the member is well aware, of a variety of business support grants through a number of departments. We've also fully funded the economic recovery package, which the Department of the Economy will use then to try and support town centres and other businesses to try and assist recovery from the pandemic. So I think there is a broad recognition that our high streets have been in trouble for some time, that wherever we can use whatever devices are available to the Executive in terms of support, that we should be doing that. We should be acting collectively across a number of departments. And I've seen, the Department of Communities have an interest, the Department for Infrastructure, in terms of the parklets. Some of the parklet schemes were launched last weekend. These are all things that collectively can contribute to improving town centres, and I think the Executive should be working right across all departments to try and do what we can do with the limited resources and fiscal levers that we have at our disposal.
Ceistóir Líntach, Sinead McLaughlin. Supplementary question for Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer so far. But, Minister, do you believe that we should be incentivising businesses to actually set up in our town centres? At the minute, the fiscal policy that we actually operate actually penalises businesses that set up. There's no level playing field here. Bricks and mortar are penalised and taxed for setting up in city centres, while online shopping has experienced great growth in recent years, and it's not going to go away. So therefore we need a complete review of how we do business and taxation here in Northern Ireland. And I would like to see you, Minister, as being a leader.
Does the member have a question, please?
No, I would just, that is the question.
Thank you.
Is he going to be a leader and a champion for delivering fiscal policy that is different and incentivising businesses?
I will be a champion, of course, for businesses, as we have distributed an enormous amount of relief and support to businesses, which wasn't the function of my own department in this time, to them to try and ensure that businesses have a chance of survival as a consequence of the pandemic. We have, as the member knows, established the Fiscal Council to look at the idea of other fiscal levers for the Executive. The only one we have at the moment is rates. It contributes about 10% of the Executive's finances. They are used to try and protect very vital public services, which serve Derry and other places, as the member will know, and are hugely important to us. So it's always that balance between trying to do that. In relation to the online presence, that's an issue for taxation, which is currently with the Treasury, and I know they are actually looking at the issue of online, because there is an unfairness between small local businesses in town centres struggling against that online presence, and it doesn't bear the same level of rates burden that town centre shops do. And so that's something that can be examined there. But I would be hoping that the Fiscal Commission will look at a range of issues in terms of the fiscal levers available to the Executive, and we use them to try and support local businesses and local jobs in the time ahead.
I call Robbie Butler for a question.
Deputy Speaker, thank the Minister for his answer so far. COVID has thrust workers and workforces into different ways of operating. Is the Minister considering developing policies or further development of an existing policy to enable people to work from home in his own department or maybe across the civil service?
Yes, I mean, a lot of trends which were already happening in terms of workforce, I think have been accelerated significantly by the experience of the pandemic and the reliance on people and the enforcement of people working from home. And so I think it will have huge implications for the way the civil service works and implications for the civil service estate as well. And you can see already in terms of private sector, people are reassessing what office space they need and how people will work going forward. And thankfully, in recent reports I've seen, sick levels have actually reduced significantly over the experience of the pandemic, where people have been able to get that work-life balance much better and that home balance better. So we are looking very much to reviewing how we do workforce planning within the civil service. We are looking at that idea of a blended approach, of a mixture between being in the office and being able to work from home. That requires IT support and a range of other matters which we have accelerated over the course of the pandemic. And we've also, I'm sure he'll be aware, begun the establishment of a ring, if you like, of hubs where people can, if they can't work from home or if they prefer to be in an office environment, that they aren't required to travel in and out of Belfast 5 days a week, that there are regional centres where people can go to, and that will have the added impact of ensuring there's an economic boost for those centres as well. So there are a whole range of measures now to be considered in terms of where people work from, what the work-life balance is like, that blended approach to work and the regional hubs and what we require in terms of civil service state and the improvements in IT that can assist all of that. That's all in the mix at the moment and will be part of a longer-term civil service review.
Supplementary question from Mr Butler.
Thank you, Mr Principal Speaker. I welcome the Minister's very positive answer. Would the Minister agree with me, whilst there's a balance to be struck between enabling working from home and the multiple benefits that you've explained, that there may actually be benefits towards those who find it hard to gain employment, particularly single-parent families and women, and there may be actual benefits further than those that we've already identified?
Yes, I agree with him. I think it's recognised that if you have that ability to work from home, then the burden, unfortunately, of a lot of home organisation falls on women unfairly, but that's the way it falls. And I think the opportunity for people to do more blended working then actually makes more accessible, particularly in relation to civil service jobs, which previously would require you to spend an hour on the road in the morning, an hour on the road in the evening, coming in and out of Belfast, or 2 hours, however the journey might be. And I think also the idea of the regional hubs then will mean people from more peripheral areas, then I think suddenly the jobs in the civil service are opened up to them as well. People from border areas, that the idea of that travel in and out, that commute, was a big challenge in terms of considering opportunities within the public sector anyway, and probably similarly within the private sector. So I think it will give us a more diverse and more balanced workforce and create more accessibility to employment for people. I think that's to be regarded as a good thing in the time ahead.
Earmark Karen Mullen for Honeycast. I call Karen Mullen for a question.
Minister, have you received any indication that the spending review will make provision for a multi-annual budget settlement or additional funds to tackle health waiting lists?
Well, I was in London a number of weeks back and I spoke to the Chancellor. I did a meeting with him and he assured us that the spending review will deliver a multi-annual budget, which is what the Executive has been seeking for some time, which gives us at least the opportunity to plan ahead and to try and deal with some of the big transformation issues like the health service. We have no indication of any additional finances for that transformational work, but we will continue to press the case for that over the time ahead, because if we are to get to, particularly in relation to our health service, if we are to get things like the waiting list reduced and the type of changes that we need to see within the health system, then we need a very significant investment from the Executive into that, and so we will press the case for that support. I know that the British Prime Minister, in terms of responding to the pandemic, said one of the issues they wanted to see was support for the health service, so we hope that translates to support for our health service here as well.
Okay, we've time for a quick supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. You had answered my supplementary, so I was just going to ask you for an update and then conversations with the Exchequer, so thank you so much for that.
The time is up now, so members just take their ease, please, while we move to the next questions to the Minister for Health.